What is a composite key in Hibernate? A composite key in Hibernate is a primary key made up of multiple columns. In Hibernate, a composite key can be represented using a separate class annotated with @embeddable or @embedded ID to represent this composite key. How does Hibernate handle SQL injection? Hibernate handles SQL injection by using a prepared statements that automatically escape SQL syntax. Additionally, using HQLR criteria API also protects against SQL injection and translate a query from SQL into SQL in a way that uses parameterized queries. What is lazy loading in Hibernate? Lazy loading in Hibernate is where an entire collection of entities is not loaded until it is accessed for the first time. This is a performance optimization technique to defer the loading of objects until they are needed. How can you achieve concurrency in Hibernate? Concurrency in Hibernate can be achieved using versioning and locking mechanisms. Hibernate supports optimistic and pessimistic locking strategies to handle concurrent modifications of data effectively. What is an optimistic locking in Hibernate? Optimistic locking in Hibernate is a technique to ensure that a record is not updated by more than one transaction at the same time by using a version field in the database table. It checks the version of a record at the time of fetching and before committing an update to ensure consistency. You have noticed that your Hibernate application is running slowly when fetching data from a database with many relationships. What strategies could you use to improve performance? To optimize query performance in Hibernate, I would consider using a lazy loading for entity relationship. This means Hibernate will only fetch related entities when they are explicitly accessed, not at the time of fetching the parent entity. Additionally, I might use batch fetching and adjust the fetch size in the configuration to reduce the number of database queries. How do you handle a Hibernate session in a web application to ensure that it is properly closed, avoiding memory leaks? In our web application, we manage Hibernate sessions by binding a session to the current thread using the current session context interface. We typically configure session opening and closing in a servlet filter or interceptors, ensuring that each request opens a session and ends by closing the session, thus prevents memory leaks. During a transaction, an error occurs after several database operations have been successfully executed. How does Hibernate ensure data integrity in this situation? Hibernate ensures data integrity by using transactions. If an error occurs during the transaction, Hibernate rolls back all the operations to the state before transaction begins, using either database transaction or a JTA transactions. This rollback mechanism prevents partial data modifications that could lead to data inconsistency. You need to add auditing features to track changes in entity data. What Hibernate features would you use to achieve this? To implement auditing in Hibernate, I would use Hibernate Inverse. It's a Hibernate module that allows for versioning of entity classes. By simply annotating our entity classes with @audited, we can keep track of changes to their state automatically. Strong versions in a separate tables. You are working in a legacy database where the tables and columns do not follow your standard naming conventions. How can you map these tables without modifying the existing database schema? In Hibernate, I handle legacy database by customizing the ORM mappings. I use the @table and @column annotations to map entity classes to the specific table names and column names defined in a legacy database. This allows us to map the entities accurately to the database schema without any changes to the database itself.